Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you new medium nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink was provided by the wonderful original mysterious benefactor, who had sent to me the entire line of inks, which was like 60 inks, by K.W.Z, which is a Polish brand, and today's is Cappuccino. Now, K.W.Z is very well known, or is getting very well known, for their wide selection of iron gall inks. This one is not iron gall, but yeah, it's Cappuccino. Cappuccino. Now, the two pens I used were these. The more moderate of them is this Pilot Plumix, with its sort of standard little stub that it comes with. And then, the more intimidating of the two. This is a Knox Plato with a very generous broad nib. Yes. Yeah, that's an intense pen. Anyways, so thought I'd give you some comparisons. So let's look at some similar inks. So here is K.W.Z's Cappuccino, and here is Gerard's VittaR. Yeah, so have you ever been to a really crappy coffee shop and, like, for some reason their coffee ends up, like, you know, if you get, like, a milky coffee, it can actually start to look a little gray, or even little hints of green? That's kind of what happens with this Cappuccino. It's not a pure brown, it definitely has some green undertones, which VittaR does too. However, Cappuccino, especially next to each other, you can see just how green it is, which is a little weird, a little gross, but it's a nice color. Now, next up, for comparison, is another K.W.Z ink. This one is iron gall, though, and this one is orange. And you might be able to tell it's a lot darker, has a lot more shading, and of course, since it's iron gall, it has different properties. Now, next up is an ink by Stipula. This one is musk green. This one is definitely a little bit more green than Cappuccino. I would just like to point out I now have over 600 of these different swatch samples. These were the closest I had. And lastly is an ink by Diatramentis. This one is khaki. Yeah, I wouldn't inherently think of that color as khaki, but there you go. This one's a bit lighter, a little bit more, actually I'd say much less saturated, and the green is very noticeable. For some reason my dog is very angry. So there you go, there are your comparisons. Now bear with me while I zoom in. Yeah, there's no graceful way to do that. Alright. Now, the one on the left with the little D in the corner, that is the one that I let dry. This one on the right is the one that's more standard, where you put the line of ink and then instantly drop it in the water. As you can see, even on the standard one, you can definitely tell where that initial drop of ink was put. And interestingly enough, we actually have a good bit of blue in this ink. That dot is definitely blue. We definitely have sort of a hazy light blue going up. Then here, right at the edge where this blue and this bright orange meet, that's where we sort of see the barest hints of the final color. Now, the one that I let dry, and bear in mind I only let it dry for maybe 8 to 10 minutes, we do see a little bit of a difference. The dot definitely got darker. The space in between that line and the orange is actually a bit, well, lighter actually, so yeah. Interesting. Alright, chemical test, for lack of a better word. Now, in the water test, you might be able to tell it actually got moving a fair bit. Now, this smear had, I don't know, maybe 20-30 minutes to dry. So, maybe it just wasn't given proper time to bond, but yeah, it definitely got moving, and that orange most especially, you can see where that dyed the page. Now, the 1/3 bleach solution, fascinatingly enough, didn't actually get rid of most of it. And in fact, the whole thing turned this blue color, then slowly over like a couple minutes, the rest of it faded to nothing. So, Ammonia Pen Flush, fascinatingly, really got the orange component moving, but you can definitely see very distinctly where that darker stuff, you know, the blue underneath remained where it was laid on most heavily. And hydrogen peroxide, kind of similar to water. So, Now, paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Yep. Yeah, so we definitely have some shading. which, I mean, I like shading, so that's good news to me. You might be able to tell where it's laid on very thick. We actually get almost a little bit of shine and a halo around the writing. And I don't know if it's going to show up. There we go. In the bottom scrubby, can you see that? Yeah, so anyways, that little Plumix stub took 12 seconds to dry. The broad took 28, and you might be able to tell just from the smear just how wet this ink is. And I say here that the flow feels like a 6 out of 10 out of the Plumix, but it feels more like a 7 out of 10 coming out of that Knox Plato. It was really going. So, yeah. Yeah, really nice shading. Just wanted to give you guys a look at that. And as I say here, there's no real bleed, feather, spread, echo, or sheen, because I don't know, is that sheen or is it just like shiny? I don't know. But the one place where we had bleed was that, and that was human error. So yeah, we didn't have real bleed on here. Now water test, it's kind of like the chromatography implied. The orange is going to wash away, and some of that blue stuff is going to remain. Now this had maybe a half an hour to dry on here before I did the water test. Yeah, maybe if I gave it more time, maybe it would do better, but honestly, a good bit of that remains in the broad nib, but again, that was a very broad nib and it was putting down a generous amount of ink. Next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. Honestly, the more I use it, the more I love it. Yeah, it looks great on here. I'm not sure I would want my cappuccino to be this color, but yeah, as I say somewhere on one of these tests, it looks more like crema, which is sort of the oily stuff that sits on the very top of a shot of espresso, which generally has more of a golden color. And that's sort of what this color reminds me of. But anyways, that little Plumix stub took 13 seconds to dry. That very wet, very generous broad nib took 28. And again, we have some lovely shading in the writing. And that stub, since it's putting down less ink, it is much lighter, but the broad, since it's putting down more, you actually get a very deeper, richer color. And again, as we might be able to see in the scrubby, where it's laid on heaviest, we get that shine. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but yeah, it's a very well saturated ink, as you can tell just from the smear. I mean, that is a solid bit of color there. It never looks undersaturated. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread. I said there might be some echo just with the sheer broadness of that Knox, but you'd have to be very sensitive to it, and I consider myself very sensitive, and I'm not sure this would bother me enough to deter me from writing on both sides. The only thing is I've pretty much given up writing on both sides of paper now. So, water test, kind of more of the same. It definitely dyed the page that light orange color because that's the part that's definitely washing away. That broader Knox left more behind. You can tell which writing it was, which lines and which dots, because they're definitely darker. But again, it was putting down just a much larger volume of ink. Now next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. I feel like everyone knows this stuff, so yeah. Did very well. This small Plumix stub took 11 seconds. Very generous in many ways. Knox Plato took 26. Again, fantastic shading. Look at all the colors. Here we don't really get that metallic shine that we see on the other test, but it still looks very well saturated. It's well behaved. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo. Definitely no sheen because we don't see that metallic shine even. I just wanted to point this out. This, yes, the orange washed away, but all the stuff underneath is actually pretty clear and pretty there. This water test, not so much. As you might be able to see, it barely dyed the page at all. And although that Plumix stub is essentially gone, I think just from the sheer amount of ink that Plato was putting down, more remains. But that's actually pretty clear and pretty there. That's fairly recoverable. And again, this only had maybe 20-30 minutes to dry on there. Next up is Tomoe River paper. It's a 52 gram per square meter paper. It is made by dark sorcerers, I'm pretty sure, because it has very strange abilities. One of them being that like nothing ever bleeds or spreads or feathers. It just brings out shading and sheen. but also draws out dry times, and it also has problems with echo just because it is so thin. I mean, this stuff is basically half the density of Clairefontaine paper. So, yeah. Definitely drew out the shading on here. I just want to bring this in. See that? You see this really distinct dark outline around the wettest parts? Yeah. And we definitely get that metallic shine thing going on. It almost looks like an oil slick. I don't know. Yeah, that small stub took 17 seconds to dry. That very generous Knox Plato only took 33. Honestly, on this paper with this, I was expecting it to be like 40-something seconds. So the fact that it was only 33, I'll definitely take it. And again, we have a very wide breadth of shading. You can see how light it gets in the lighter areas of the stub, and how it gets almost like, it's almost like it wants to approach near black, just where it's laid on heaviest. But yeah, quite well behaved. No bleed, no feather, no spread. There might be some echo, but I feel like that's mostly the scrubby, and that was, I feel like, mostly human error, just because I was laying it on really thick because I wanted to make sure I could get some of that metallic shine I'd been seeing on camera. But again, that very broad Knox, like this line right where my finger is, you might be able to see that, and that's just because that pen was putting down so much ink, and it was getting very dark, especially in those like halo outline things. Just from the sheer thinness of that paper, that might aggravate you a bit. So, I don't know, maybe keep an eye on it or keep it in mind. Sensitivity to this stuff is always to taste, you know? It's kind of hard to predict what will annoy other people. Now, water test. This paper loves to let inks just slide away when you add more water. And it kind of did. It barely dyed the page, and it took a lot of the writing with it. That stub is practically gone. That fairly broad nib, a little more remains, but really not much. It's very light, but I don't know, maybe if you had to recover it, you could. Now for the 3 more economical papers, I only used that small Plumix stub. Felt like it was more fair, but I did use that broad to write the name, to amusing effect. Now, this is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. This stuff is awful. It's just terrible. It's trash. Now, what's interesting is I feel like on here we can definitely start to see a little bit more of that green undertone. And I think in a weird way it's because we essentially lose all shading on here. Now, on here it did take 1 second to dry, which makes sense because this is very absorbent paper. We do get a woolliness because we can start to see the texture of the pulp of the paper, but it could be a lot worse. Yeah, there's feathering, which isn't great, but honestly, I mean, this paper is awful. I've just stopped expecting good results on it. I can pretty much guarantee you something better than this, so chances are you'll get better results, but we don't get bleed. There is essentially no bleed except for here, which is where I actually scratched through the page with the edge of that stub. But as you can see, everywhere else is very dark, or sorry, very light, which means that although it's sunk deep into the page, it is not coming out the back, which is nice. So at least there's that. I say there's spots of full-on bleed, but yeah, no, I don't see any. Oh, I bet it was that. Yeah, okay. Anyways, yeah, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in and not want to let it go. And so water tests tend to be a little more interesting. And I feel like that's definitely what happened here. This really sunk into the paper and it really did not want to let go. However, kind of like that chromatography, you can actually see the water in the water test, like you see in the E. You can see some of that blue, and the orange is trying to let go. It's trying to wash away. So, I mean, it's kind of a cool effect. It looks like it's on fire, but yeah, this, if you had to recover that, I think you could, just because the stuff at the center is very calm, it's staying put, and the orange is not terribly distracting because it's a much lighter color. So, I don't know. I feel like if you had to recover that, you could. It might be a bit messy, but Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. It is extremely common for school children in the United States. This stuff is the kind that you would find in like a composition notebook. What does that mean? It means that it has a texture extremely similar to newsprint. So yeah, if you've ever tried to do a crossword in a fountain pen, you can probably anticipate the results. However, it didn't go as badly as I was expecting. Now, it took 2 seconds to dry on here, and if you'll notice, we get nowhere near the amount of spread that we did on that 20 pound. So it spread much, much less. We do have a bit of a woolly effect. I think that's just from how the paper is made. And if you look, we actually don't get a whole lot of feathering. We get very, very little. And it's the same all throughout. In fact, it's actually kind of hard to find any. So that's actually rather nice. We get, very little spread. We get almost no feathering. We have no full-on bleed, except up here with that very generous broad, but that kind of makes sense. So honestly, if you weren't sensitive to it, you could probably write on both sides, but I am sensitive to it, so Now this paper can freak out when you add water, as you might be able to tell just from the shape of the paper, because it has taken on a very strange shape now. It can freak out when you add water, and here we actually weirdly don't get as favorable results as we did on the 20 pound, which might be the first time I'm saying that like ever. But again, you can see the stuff at the center is trying to remain, and the orange is trying to wash away, just not very successfully. So it is getting lighter, it is dyeing the page, it is starting to spread and feather a bit, so it would not be the easiest thing in the world to recover. Now, lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, which I hate because it is very badly made. Yeah. 8 seconds to dry. Here we do retain some shading, but it's what I have come to call bad shading, because where enough ink remains to make the line darker, that is where we get feathers. And they are some fairly large, distracting type feathers, which is unfortunate. And it bled onto the next page. Now, it didn't bleed everywhere, but honestly, it bled a lot more than I was expecting, and weirdly, only in little spots. Yeah, and I mean, this is the Plumix nib, like it's just a tiny little stub. It's not particularly wet. It's not a large nib. It's unfortunate. Water test, this paper also freaks out when you add water, and here it really did, because I just want you to see this. First of all, look at all the orange and how much of a mess it's making, but I also want you to see that, like, the stuff at the center, the blue-gray stuff, it's freaking out. It's trying to let go, which it hasn't done anywhere else, really. Anyways, there you go for your consideration. K.W.Z's Cappuccino. It's a little too green for my cappuccinos. However, it is a very nice color, and if you like Gérard's Lit d'été, there's quite similar. It's very well behaved. It has some wonderful shading. It did okay on cheaper papers, not great. It had some redeeming qualities there. Not the most permanent ink, but it does have a little bit of permanence. So, yeah. There you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.